All right, so are you ready to dive deep into this election?
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
Okay, so we're talking about the recent U.S. election, obviously, the one where Donald Trump won and Kamala Harris's campaign kind of fell short.
Right.
And we're not just going to talk about who won or lost here. We're going to try to unpack why things happened the way they did.
Yeah.
And we're using some analysis from Michael Colton, CEO of Strafe Media.
Yeah, he's got some really interesting insights, that's for sure.
Totally. And one of the biggest surprises for me is that, get this, the majority of U.S. voters didn't actually fully support either major candidate.
It is pretty wild when you think about it like that.
Yeah, like right off the bat, that makes you think, what does that say about the state of politics today?
Well, for one thing, it kind of blows up the idea that Trump won because he had this massive surge in popularity.
Oh, interesting. You're saying it wasn't about him gaining more supporters.
Right. Colton's data actually shows that Trump's support has been pretty steady. Like it's been consistent across 3 elections.
So around the same number of people voted for him each time.
Pretty much. Something like 74 million voters have stuck with him.
Wow. Okay, so if his numbers didn't suddenly jump up, then what happened on the other side?
Well, it seems like the Democrats took a pretty big hit, like a really big hit.
Bigger than usual.
Way bigger. They're down more than 10 million votes compared to the last election.
10 million. That's a ton of people who just decided, what, not to vote this time.
Or they switched sides, yeah. And Colton outlines 4 main reasons why he thinks this happened.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the first thing that contributed to this decline for the Democrats?
Well, the economy is a big one. A lot of voters felt like they were worse off financially than they were 4 years ago.
Because of things like inflation. We heard a lot about that during the campaign.
Exactly. Inflation, stagnant wages, the whole 9 yards. And they basically blamed the current administration for it.
Even though it was a different candidate this time around.
Right, but voters still saw Harris as an extension of those policies. Like they didn't really differentiate between her and the previous administration.
So it's kind of like they were saying, we want change, even if it was just a different face from the same party.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. Classic throw the bums out mentality.
Makes sense. People feel the pinch in their wallets. They're less likely to stick with the same old, same old.
Exactly.
Okay, but there had to be more to it than just the economy, right?
Right. The second thing is, this might be a bit controversial, but some voters just weren't that into Harris as a candidate.
Really? Like they just didn't find her appealing? In what way?
Well, some felt that her selection as Biden's running mate wasn't really, democratic.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean by that?
Like they saw her as more of an appointed figure rather than someone who was truly chosen by the people.
Huh. I see. So they felt like it wasn't really a fair process.
Yeah, some felt like it was more about identity politics than merit, if that makes sense.
That's interesting. It's almost like what some Democrats were saying about the Republicans in the past.
Exactly. The whole undemocratic argument seems to come from both sides now.
So bit of a sauce for the goose, sauce for the gander.
Yeah, pretty much. Colton actually points out that hypocrisy in his analysis.
So basically, we got to be careful about throwing those accusations around too casually, no matter which side we're on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's 2 reasons down. The economy and the candidate herself. What else is on Colton's list?
Okay, so this next one is about Biden, or more specifically about how his exit was handled.
Oh, you mean the whole stepping down thing?
Yeah. Colton argues that the public pressure on Biden to step down, with all the concerns about his health, that it really hurt the Democrats.
Even though it seemed pretty clear he couldn't do another term.
Right. But it's how it was handled. That's the issue. All that public speculation about his health, even coming from Democrats, it made some voters feel like their choice was being undermined.
I can see that. Like their vote for him in the last election was almost being disrespected.
Exactly. All the media talk about his age, the calls for him to step aside. It created this narrative that he was being pushed out.
Rather than deciding on his own terms.
Right.
So are you saying those voters felt like their chosen leader was being disrespected and that translated into them not voting for a successor?
That's the argument, yeah.
Okay, that's 3 strikes. Economic anxieties, a candidate some people didn't connect with, and the whole Biden situation. What's the final factor that messed things up for the Democrats?
This one has to do with what Colton calls the wide tent strategy backfiring.
Oh, right. Remember how the Democrats were trying to appeal to a broader range of voters, like independents and even some moderate conservatives?
Exactly. The problem is those voters tend to be less loyal than the core Democratic base.
Meaning they might vote Democrat one time, but they're not guaranteed to do it again the next time around.
Exactly.
So what issues push those voters away this time?
Well, Colton points to immigration and the whole debate about transgender athletes in women's sports as being particularly divisive.
Yeah, those are definitely hot button issues.
And it seems like the Democrats' positions on those topics didn't sit well with that wider tent they were trying to build.
So they ended up alienating some of the very people they were trying to attract.
Pretty much like that old saying, trying to please everyone pleases no one.
And in politics, those displeased voters can really shake things up.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got a pretty clear picture here. It seems like Trump won not because his own popularity surged, but because of these four factors that pushed voters away from the Democrats.
But it wasn't just about who people voted for, but who they decided not to vote for.
Exactly. It's a really interesting distinction. It shows how complex things are, how voters are thinking about these issues and making decisions.
For sure. And it shows the challenges both parties face in trying to get a clear message across to the voters about what they stand for.
So we've seen how all this played out in the election. But what does it mean going forward? Is this like a turning point for American politics, or is it just a blip on the radar?
That's a great question, and one that we'll dive into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after a short break.
We've got a lot more to unpack. You know, the Republicans might want to hold off on that victory lap for a second.
Oh, why? I thought they got exactly what they wanted with Trump back in the White House.
Yeah, true, but remember, almost 75% of the voters weren't totally thrilled with either candidate.
Right. We talked about that. But what does that mean for the Republicans now?
Well, governing without a clear mandate from the voters, it can be tricky. It can lead to a lot of pushback.
Okay, I'm starting to see what you mean. It's not just about winning. It's about what happens after you win.
Exactly. And that's a big part of Colton's analysis.
So what's he saying?
He says the Republicans really need to tread carefully, especially if they don't win a majority in the House.
So even if they have Trump back in the Oval Office, they can't just push through whatever agenda they want.
Not if they want to avoid some serious backlash. No.
Right. Makes sense. I mean, if that many people weren't happy with either candidate, there's got to be a lot of frustration out there.
Exactly. And that can lead to gridlock, protests, all sorts of things.
Yeah, if one party tries to force their will on everyone, it usually doesn't end well.
It rarely does. And this election really highlighted how divided we are as a country.
It really did, didn't it? You see it everywhere, on social media, in the news, even within families.
It's like we can't even agree on basic facts anymore.
Yeah, everyone's retreating into their own little echo chambers.
And that makes it even harder to find common ground and actually get things done.
So what's the takeaway for the Republicans then? What should they be focusing on as they start this new term?
Well, Colton doesn't give specific policy recommendations, but he stresses the need for, I guess you could say, humility.
Humility.
Yeah, like they need to recognize that a lot of people didn't vote for them and try to address those concerns.
So it's not just about catering to their base.
No, it's about finding ways to build consensus to bring people together.
That's a tough ask in this kind of climate, isn't it?
It is, but it's also essential if we want to move forward as a country. We can't just keep fighting amongst ourselves.
Yeah, we got to find a way to bridge these divides somehow.
Absolutely. And maybe this election, as crazy as it was, can be a wake-up call.
A wake-up call for what?
A wake-up call that the old ways of doing things might not work anymore. That maybe the two-party system is broken.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, especially after seeing those voter numbers.
What have you been thinking?
Well, if so many people are dissatisfied with both major parties, could this be a chance for third parties or independent candidates to actually gain some traction?
That's a great question. And it's one that Colton's analysis really makes us think about.
Like, do we even need these two big parties anymore, or are they just holding us back?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely a conversation we need to be having.
Right. There's got to be a better way to do this whole politics thing.
Maybe there is. Maybe this election is the start of something new, something better.
It definitely feels like something's changing. Like we're on the verge of...
On the verge of what?
I don't know, a political realignment, maybe?
Yeah.
A shift away from this two-party system towards something more diverse, more representative.
That's possible. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating, so unpredictable.
We're in uncharted territory, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And the future of American politics, it's still very much up in the air.
Well, we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We talked about Trump's win, the Democrats' struggles, and what might be next for American politics. It's been, I don't know, pretty thought-provoking.
Yeah, it definitely gives you pause. A lot to process.
Totally. So as we wrap up here, what are the big takeaways? What does all this tell us about where things are headed?
Well, to me, the biggest takeaway is like, we're in uncharted waters. This wasn't just a regular election. This was something different.
Yeah, it felt like a real shakeup, like the old rules don't apply anymore.
Right. Both parties, they need to figure out how to adapt to this new reality. Otherwise, they risk becoming irrelevant.
Yeah, it's like we're standing on the edge of something big is coming, but we don't know what it is yet.
Exactly. And that's both exciting and a little scary, right?
For sure. But here's the thing that keeps coming back to me. The voters, we have more power than we realize.
Oh, absolutely.
So are you saying we shouldn't just sit back and watch all this unfold? Like we actually have a say in how this all plays out.
100%. Colton makes a really good point in his analysis. We're not just spectators in this whole democracy thing. We're active participants. It's on us to engage, to hold our leaders accountable, and to think about alternatives if we're not happy with the status quo.
Okay, so if you're not happy with the two main parties, what can you actually do about it?
Lots of things. You could explore third parties, get involved in local politics, or even run for office yourself.
Wow. Okay, so it's like we have this huge opportunity to reshape the system. It's not just about picking from the options given to us. We can create new options.
Exactly. This isn't just about Republicans versus Democrats anymore. It's about finding new ways to make our voices heard, to build a future that actually represents what we want.
It's inspiring in a way. Like if you don't like how things are going, you can actually do something to change them.
That's the whole point of democracy. Don't just complain. Do something about it. Get involved, organize, advocate for the changes you want to see. This is your democracy.
This deep dive has really given me a lot to think about. It's not just about elections, it's about how we, the people, can actually shape the future.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And it all starts with staying informed, having thoughtful conversations, and being open to challenging our own assumptions.
Well said. So, to everyone listening out there, don't underestimate your own power. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. Stay engaged, stay curious, and stay hopeful. Because who knows, we might surprise ourselves with what we can achieve if we work together.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive on the U.S. election. Thanks for joining us. We hope you learned something new and that you'll keep these conversations going. The future of American politics, it's in our hands.